That when we talk about county-owned property, do we have a sense of what properties we have available of an appropriate size for that? And question related to that is transportation, particularly for Huber people.
We don't have any county-owned properties that are specifically designated for this project yet. There's a lot of properties.
Have we looked at the range of, I mean, we know what property we own. We probably have a sense of how big it would need to be. So have we?
That is one of the things that this study will help define, because essentially for the Greenfield options, we're trying to look at a single-story option, so that essentially that'll give you the sort of the maximum footprint, and then we're also trying to estimate number of parking spaces.
Mhm.
So that should give you at least a area in terms of acreage that you might need for a site. So that will help inform that next step in the process, which is, okay, now we know it's about this big, and let's look at the property that's available. But that's not really part of this study at the present time.
My question probably to the facilities folks is, do we know what properties there are available that might be suitable? Or would we end up having to look at buying property?
I think either of those options are possible. I believe the Department of Administration is closer to knowing what properties we own that may be viable, but it's not something I'm looking into at this point.
Supervisor Rice? But it says in line 54, county-owned or purchased. So are we going to look at the county-owned first and then, or is the word "or purchased" not supposed to be here?
I think it just means the Greenfield site. They're not determining right now, this is the site. They're saying if you go to a Greenfield site,
Okay.
you need 22 acres to do it, or 40, I don't know what the number is. But you need this number of acres, and then that will be determined later.
So they're not going to worry about purchase price of property as needed?
Correct, that's not part of this, figuring that cost.
Supervisor Beer?
That's a big number for us to think about.
So I wanted to ask, when you're incorporating into these numbers, I get that you're not going to say where it's going to be. We don't know yet. But, you know, the county board considered a Greenfield site before and did not support that. I understand why we're doing this again and that people need more options, and I appreciate that. But I have huge concerns with the Greenfield site, and I wanted to see if it's possible how these costs can be incorporated, or if they can't, it's helpful to know that, because I want to go out and find these numbers. The Huber question is spot on. I mean, the idea of Huber individuals being somewhere that we don't know yet, and I get that you don't know where this Greenfield site is, but Huber doesn't work if you don't have access to Madison Metro. Madison, right now, the current Huber site, you get the bus and you go straight to the south transfer point, and from there you have options. If the new site is somewhere that is not Madison Metro accessible, that's a problem. I don't understand how Huber is successful, and I don't want to say no, because that's not at the stage that we're at. At least, in my opinion, I feel like, okay, people want options. Let's look at options, but part of me wants to somehow see then that this option takes into account that we're going to have to shuttle every Huber inmate to the nearest transfer point, and we're going to have, you know, a shuttle bus every 10 minutes, or something to acknowledge that this just doesn't work unless you have access to Madison Metro. And as much as also I'd love to have the answer that, well, then we'll just pay Madison Metro some money to buy us a bus route, I know it doesn't work that easily. And I know that they're at capacity and they can't buy more buses because the bus barn is oversized. So I just want to make sure, I want to know if numbers like that are being considered, because I don't want us to make the mistake of if we're looking at it from a numbers perspective to say, oh, this is X million dollars less, let's go with it for that purpose, when in the end, not only do I think I would argue it won't be successful, but for it to be successful, we're going to have to provide some sort of shuttle service. So, sorry to go on. So my question is, will that be a number that's incorporated into what you're doing? Or if it's not, that's good to know, because then Supervisor Krause, if you want to team up with me or anybody else, I want to go and find out the answer to these numbers, because that's a big deal.
Well, what I can answer from Mead and Hunt's perspective in terms of what we've been asked to do is we won't be providing those numbers at this juncture as part of this particular study, but we will be providing a narrative which would identify that those are questions that need to be answered upon further consideration of that option.
I mean, and that's not just a Huber inmate thing, that's all inmates. If individuals are not near the courthouse, then we have to talk about access to the courthouse, but if they're not downtown and centrally located, we're talking about access to their individual family members, access to their attorneys who are downtown and centrally located, because all criminal defense attorneys are used to being in court all the time, and they're located near the courthouse. Just all these factors, besides the fact that as a City of Madison resident, I'm not interested in overtaxing the City of Madison, which is the largest user of the Dane County Jail, where the idea that this Greenfield site could be somewhere very far away. I just want to make sure we're having an understanding of what the costs actually are, should the county board seriously consider something that is just not centrally located.
I think we got to look at these things. I'm really, really skeptical on the last option of a Greenfield space. I probably know where more county land is than anybody else in the room here. And I've been trying to think of, there's a couple places we own, the Clay Barrow site out in Cottage Grove, and none of these are anywhere near bus routes. There's land adjacent to the city right now. I believe it's going for $90,000 an acre. If you want to get even closer, where there'd be a bus route, and you're going to be way more than that, I'm sure. So it's going to be almost impossible, unless I guess we could establish a shuttle service or something. But that's the one that bothers me, because I think we're wasting our time on that one. So I'm hoping at that point they look briefly at that one and see how many problems there are with it, and concentrate on the other two, and compare them with the behind the building setup.
How many acres do you need for the Greenfield site?
Do you know the answer to that yet?
When I look at the bullet points, will that, I don't see the determining the number of acreage in the bullet points, but is that one of the things?
We can
that's
translate
within
the
it?
square footage to acreage. That's easy enough to do. We can make a note to do that.
So is one of the products that you'd be producing as part of this study determining the acreage, not just the square footage of the building, but the acreage of the site? Would that be something that would be determined?
I think what we'll provide is, we'll provide a footprint in terms of square footage of a building and square footage of a parking lot, and then we could draw a box around that. We can say this box represents X number of acres. That's pretty easy to do on the drawing. That's just a note to add, and we can add that in the narrative. And then that'll inform the next evolution of this selection and study process. Obviously, there's more detailed work to do once we decide on where the project is going to go.
So when you talk about so-called ballpark estimate, and I don't know how many acres are in a ballpark, but I'm sure someone's figured that out. I know the chief deputy cited the number 22 acres. Do you think 22 acres is within the ballpark?
When
of the
I
number
said
of acres?
22, I said I don't know any.
Okay, but you use 22 as an example. I'm just trying to get a sense.
And then I said 42.
42. Would either 22 or 42 be within the
I
ballpark?
don't know yet. I don't know
Okay.
yet, because we haven't finished the sizing of the largest Greenfield option. So
I like 84.
So, but you wouldn't rule out 20 or 40 or even 80? possible?
I don't know.
Don't know until we see the
Okay.
size of the footprint.
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, if I had an idea, I would certainly tell you, but we're
Okay,
just not there yet.
but you wouldn't rule out any of those options in terms of 20, 40, or 80 acres?
I guess what I'm saying is I don't know what answer to tell you right now until we size the footprint.
Okay.
Put it in an apartment?